Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse every Thursday and share it as the Madlik podcast on your favorite platform. This week's parsha is Devarim. The book of Deuteronomy, known as the Second Torah, is not only spoken in the first-person voice of Moses, but is also a reworking and reinterpretation of earlier events. This is nowhere more apparent than in the retelling of the story of the spies, where, in our disruptive reading tonight, the spies and their generation are not blamed for being too weak, but rather for being too militaristic. In this week, where an escalation in the current war is like a dark cloud above us, join us for Just War. So, Rabbi, we're doing another book, the fifth book. I can't believe another year is coming to an end.
It's a great book. I mean, it's so much different than the first four books, so this is going to be fun.
It is, and I have to say, you and I both know, if you have an opinion, if you have an interpretation, you're going to find it in one of the rabbinic texts. And tonight, I have to say, I come as close to saying that I came across an interpretation that to me is intuitive, and I haven't really found anyone who goes that way. So I want you to play a little bit the devil's advocate and really, for sure, tell me if I'm off the derech, so to speak, off the road, because I am going to go down in a different direction. As I said, we're going to be a little disruptive in our reading of how Moses retells the story of the spies, the scouts, the meraglim. So, are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm ready.
So you're going to play the devil's advocate, right?
I'm ready.
Sounds good. Okay, so we are in Deuteronomy 1, and God spoke to us at Horeb, saying, "You have stayed long enough at this mountain." It is clear from the get-go that Devarim, Deuteronomy, is, if it's about anything, it's time to go into the land. Start out and make your way to the hill country of the Amorites and to all their neighbors in the Arava, the hill country, the Shephelah, the Negev, the seacoast, the land of the Canaanites, and the Lebanon, as far as the river, the great river and the river of Euphrates. See, I place this land at your disposal. Go take possession of the land that God swore to your fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to assign to them and to their heirs after them. So, you know, Rabbi, I'm a big believer in Shnaya Mikra Echad Targum. I study my Chumash with my Rashi. So, all of a sudden, I get to this verse, and Rashi says, "Go in and possess the land." He says, "There was no one who will contest the matter, and you will not need to wage war. Indeed, had they not sent the spies, but had trusted in God's promise, they would not have needed weapons of war." And this is based, as always, on the rabbinic texts, in this case, the Sifari and the Devarim. So Rashi takes a very close look at it, says, Urashu et haaretz. A Yerusha, as you know, is an inheritance. It doesn't say conquer the land, it says inherit the land. And Rashi, based on the Sifri, says, this is a dig. This is saying that had this plan worked out according to the plan, there would be no reason to conquer the land. And so I said to myself, okay, that's an interesting Rashi. And as I said in the intro, we have to be very careful when the book of Devarim recounts an episode, because as Everett Fox writes in his introduction, this is all about reworking of earlier material. This is all about reinterpreting it and repositioning it. And it's interesting that we start out with what you would say is Moses' seminal stories. And what does he talk about? He talks about choosing the leaders. This is a part we're not really going to touch in tonight, but you can see an absolute retelling of what we all consider and associate with Jethro. That Jethro said to Moses either before the giving of the Torah or after the giving of the Torah, you can't do this all by yourself. You have to appoint judges. In this rendering of it, there's no Jethro, but the main thing is it's seminal. And some people say that Moses makes a slight change. Instead of people who are fearful of God, he says we're going to appoint wise people. But be that as it's may, we're getting to see what the important stories, the seminal stories are for Moses. So that is one. And the next one is the sending of the spies with all the disastrous consequences. Now, I would ask you, Rabbi, you would ask me, what is the seminal sin of the Jewish people? I think we would all say the Chet HaEgel, the golden calf.
I think we would. Right. Okay, go on.
So
I mean, I have something to say about this, but I want to hear yours.
No. I want to hear right from the get-go, why do you think, is it significant that Moses picked these two stories to re-render or repeat? And where was he going with them?
So my read of this is that the reason Moses chooses the story of the Meraglim, it doesn't answer your whole thing, but that he chooses the story of the Meraglim is because in Moses's mind, the reason Moses was punished was for the Meraglim. Now, that's not really true because what he's punished for is the fact that he hit the rock. But he seems to say in this description that God got angry at all of us, including me, and that's why I was punished. And I think that's his real issue here.
I love the fact that you link it to Moses not going into the promised land.
That's the only thing he cares about. In verse 37, it says, Gam bi hitanaf Hashem biglalchem lemor. God got angry at me because of you, and he said, Gam ata lo tavo sham, that you won't enter the land. That is not true. We know that it's not true. Nowhere in the story of the spies does God get angry at Moses. This is Moses's kind of reflecting at the end of his life about what went wrong. And he says it couldn't be the hitting of the rock that went wrong. That wasn't important enough. The spies, that was a bad thing. And it must be that it's your fault. Had you guys not screwed up, then I'd be going into the land. That's my read. Now, I can't explain the first piece. I guess the first piece has to do with Moses. It made his life easier, something like that.
You mean the first piece is appointing, rehashing this appointing of judges and magistrates and all
right.
that. I mean, I think that maybe I could embellish what you just said is Moses is thinking about two things. He's thinking about why he didn't go, and he's thinking about what tools do they need that they're going without me. And maybe that's where he's focused on setting up the bureaucracy, if you will, to make sure that there's leadership going forward. But I think you're right. Everything has to be from the perspective of Moses. So I think what you just said is a perfect segue to how this renders it, the spies, from the get-go differently. In Deuteronomy 1:22, it says, Then all of you came to me and said, Let us send agents ahead to recontour the land for us and bring back word on the route we shall take and the cities we shall come to. I approved of the plan. So I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that this is different than the way the story is rendered in Numbers. And it fits exactly into what you were saying. Moses is, in a sense, taking blame for it. While as in the Numbers edition, it was they came and God talked to God and God said, let them send the spies. Here, Moses is linking this to himself. You think there's something there?
I mean, that's my point, right? I mean, you're making it a little differently, but that's the point. The point is that it's about Moses. The whole book of Devarim is about Moses. right? Is how Moses thinks about his lot. And he feels at the end of this whole story that his lot is an unfair lot.
Cool. So again, getting back to what I was saying, that first Rashi that says, if there had been no sin of the Meraglim, of the spies, we would not even need an army to take possession or repossession of our land. If you notice a second ago when I read verse 22, he says, go recontour the land for us and bring back word on the route we shall follow and the cities we shall come to. Nothing about spying it out, seeing their far walls, or how big the defense system was. Literally, in Moses' mind, getting back to him accepting the blame, but he's also saying, but I wasn't sending them to see if it was possible. I was telling them, go figure it out, because we've got to pick up all of our tents. We got to make a right. We got to make a left. We got to go north. We got to go south. Find us the best route we can take. He says, I approved the plan, and I selected 12 participants. They made for the hill country. They took some of the fruit of the land with them and brought it down to us, and they gave us this report. It is a good land that our God is giving us. Then it says, yet you refused to go up and flouted the command of your God. You sulked in your tents and said, it is out of hatred for us that God brought us out of the land of Egypt to hand us over to the Amorites to wipe us out. What kind of place are we going to? Our brothers have taken the heart out of us, saying, we shall there a people stronger, taller than we are. So now he gets into the standard thing where, for whatever reason, the scouts interpret the purpose, or at least the outcome of their trip, that some of them came back with a bad report and took the heart out of them. I said to you, have no dread or fear of them. None other than your God who goes before you will fight for you. Elohechem haholech lifnechem hu yilachem lachem. God is going to fight for you, just as he did for you in Egypt, right? The Jews didn't lead a revolt in Egypt. They didn't go against the Egyptians. In Egypt before your very eyes. And in the wilderness where you saw how your God carried you as a householder carries his son all the way that you traveled until you came to this place. So it is kind of fascinating it once you put on the lens of that original Rashi based on the Sifrei, that there is this tension here between, and this even wasn't supposed to be a battle. If there was going to be a battle, it was going to be God waging the battle. This was going to be like Yetziat Mitzrayim. This is going to be Knesset Eretz Yisrael. It's interesting how war and not war is playing out here, and the motifs that it uses again focuses a little bit on this generation of the Exodus that literally grew up knowing miracles happen. We left Egypt, we can go into this land. Yet for all of that, you have no faith in your God. God who goes before you on your journeys to scout the place where you are to encamp in fire by night and cloud by day. You should have just relied on God. God heard your loud complaint and became angry, and he vowed, not one of those involved in this evil generation shall see the good land that I swore to give to your fathers, none except Caleb, son of Yefunah. He shall see it, and to him and his descendants will I give the land on which he set foot, because he remained loyal. I mean, you could have said Joshua too. I think the assumption is it's Caleb and Joshua.
Right. I mean, that the commentaries all talk about that, right? That's a good question.
To your point, it doesn't mention Moses. In a sense, it's almost saying as though Moses also had the mentality of the generation of the Exodus. After all, he was one who, when they left Egypt, he didn't start that revolution. He relied on God to do it for him. And so it says, because of you, God was incensed with me too. Getting to your point, Moses is now saying, and I suffered because of this, saying, you shall not enter it. Either Joshua, son of Nun, who attends you, he shall enter it, imbue him with strength. So this is kind of interesting that Caleb goes on his own right, and Joshua is actually vicarious. He's representing Moses. He's his student. And it says, moreover, your little ones who said you would be afraid for their lives, they will go in. As for you, turn about and march into the wilderness by the way of the Sea of Reeds. Okay. End of story. Except in 41 it says, you replied to me saying, we stand guilty before God. We will go up now and fight, just as our God commanded us. So now all of a sudden you get a bunch of them who are admitting their guilt. Their guilt that they are feeling is that they should have attacked when God told them to attack. Again, there's a lot of mixed messaging going on here, and they decide that the right thing to do is to now take up arms and attack. So the men among you each girded yourself with war gear and recklessly started for the hill country. Anachnu na'aleh v'nilchamnu. We're going to go up and we're going to fight. But God said to me, warn them, do not go up and do not fight, since I am not in your midst, else you'll be routed by your enemies. V'lo tilchamu, do not fight. I spoke to you, but you would not listen. You flouted God's commands and willfully marched into the hill country. Then the Amorites who have lived in those hills came out against you like so many bees and chased you, and they crushed you at Hormah in Seir. Again, you wept before God, but God would not hear your cry or give ear to you. So this part of the story is much more embellished in Dvarim than it was in Numbers. In Numbers, it was just a few lines. Here, it goes into great details that these guys misread or tried to make up for where they had failed before. They interpreted their failure before they should have fought. Now they were going to fight. And again, we always associate the chet of the meraglim, the sin of the spies, with tears. Rav Kook famously said, it says in Numbers, you cried for no reason, now you will suffer for no reason.
Right.
But here we have crying twice. Once they cried when they were punished that they wouldn't go into the land, and now they cry again when they went to war and they were defeated. I think that adding all of this stuff about fighting, especially in light of the Sifri, is very impactful. And it almost, I wouldn't say it's an argument between pacifism and fighting, because that is reading too much into it, but it certainly is about when is the proper time to fight and when is not. But before I let you comment, let's go to Deuteronomy 2, also in our Parsha. And they talks about at length, Moses now says what you need to do. And again, he's operating under the assumption, and this is not Rashi and this is not the Sifrei, that they can get into the land without fighting. So he says, go up from the Sea of Reeds, and he says, you have been skirting this hill country. He says, go to the descendants of Esau who live in Seir. They will be afraid of you. Be very careful not to provoke them, for I will not give you of their land so much as a foot can tread on. I have given the hill country of Seir as a possession to Esau. He's saying, you can't take other people's possessions. You're going to take your own. Don't provoke them. What food you eat, you shall obtain from them for money. Even the water you drink, you shall procure for them for money. Indeed, and he goes on to talk about, he said, do not harass the Moabites or provoke them to war. He's talking about three different tribes that the Jews should try to make peace with. The Jews should try to get license to transfer over their property, and don't shake the boat. Don't rattle the sword. Do it peacefully. And he goes up now, cross the Wadi Zered. So we crossed the Wadi Zered. The time that we spent in travel from Kadesh Barnea until we crossed the Wadi Zered was 38 years. And then he says, until that whole generation of warriors had perished from the camp. Rabbi, here is the punchline. He is referring to the generation of the Exodus that we always call the generation of the Exodus, the ones that sent the scouts who came back and gave a bad report and they decided they didn't have the gumption to attack. He is calling them a generation of warriors who had perished from the camp of God. Indeed, the hand of God struck them to root them out from the camp until they were finished. When all the warriors among the people had died old, Kol anshe hel milchamut lamut bekerev ha'am. This just blew me away. I had never focused on this characterization of the Dor HaMidbar, the generation of the Exodus, as a generation of warriors. And clearly what he's focused on, Rabbi, is not the beginning of the story, it's the end of the story. It's when they said, my God, we just lost such an opportunity with these spies and listening to them. Let's take up arms and attack. That is how he characterized the generation. And if you put it into context about all of this narrative about don't get the people of Esau excited, don't provoke the people of Moab, it's pretty clear that whether he's a pacifist or whether he is simply saying there's a time for war and you people are just warriors. You're like surgeons who only know how to solve a problem with a scalpel. Okay, I'm open. I'm listening.
Now, good. I like that a lot. That's fantastic to notice that. How does that have to do with Moses? How does that relate to my little thing that Moses was concerned about his spot?
So if you read it this way, Moses took offense with not the beginning of the story, but the second part of the story. The second part of the story is how they reacted to the crisis that they created. If the story had ended where they cried in their tents, who knows what would have happened? But Moses is focused on the fact that these people then took to arms, and again, it fits into what he's saying now. He's telling them, you're a new generation. Be nice to the neighbors. Go through their lands. Don't provoke them. I mean, in a sense, you can only make the assumption, and then maybe the assumption is, to answer your question, if it takes military arms to take the land, then maybe Moses really is a slave of the generation of the Exodus. Maybe he wasn't ready to do it. Because if you look at it now, you kind of have a binary. Either the generation of the Exodus were pitiful cowards who lacked faith, or they were people who reacted to their failure to stand up and be men at the right time, and were men of milchama who could only wage war out of weakness. I don't know. That's the way I'm looking at it now. We got a lot more interpretations to go through. But it does make it fascinating that he calls them anshe ha-milchama, which is the last thing that you and I would call them.
Right. I mean, there is a question whether it's good or bad to be anshe milchama. Means anshe milchama is descriptive. It's not complimentary or critical exactly.
It is descriptive. But what you're saying is, therefore, that it's not as though he's saying you, the Anshe Milchama, are being cursed by virtue of being Anshe Milchama.
That is exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
It's not clear.
So let's go through the classical text, because I said I didn't find anyone who was in line with my thinking. Before we go to any other text, let's go to Joshua. Joshua 5:6 says, "For the Israelites had traveled into the wilderness 40 years until the entire nation, the men of military age who had left Egypt, had perished because they had not obeyed God." Now, I have to say, if you read the Hebrew, it says, "Ken 40 shana halchu b'nei Yisrael b'midbar ad tom kol hagoy anshe hamilchama hayotzim mimitzrayim." He uses the same word. It is the translator who translate anshe milchama, which means people of war, to people of military age. So I can't even bring Joshua as a proof, but I will say that this is the standard rabbinic interpretation. If you look at Bechor Ashur, he says, Anshe Milchama, citizens of age for war from 20 years and older. If you look at Rav Hirsch on the Chumash, he says, Anshe Milchama, those who were of military age at the time the scouts were sent, and who should therefore have been active in the planned occupation of the land at the time, but who shied away from this task out of God-forgotten faint-heartedness. So he takes this and turns it on its head. He's like saying, you are someone who had the ability to attack, and you were a coward. And he's kind of rubbing it in. But you have to admit, Rabbi, that he's touching on the question. He definitely sees the...
Yeah, I mean, he's aware of the issue.
He's aware of the issue. The Eitz Chaim says generation of warriors, literally people of battle. Ironically, says the Eitz Chaim, that name is given to those who quarreled constantly with God and with Moses in the wilderness, not to their children who will actually conquer the promised land. Ultimately, Israel's quarrels with God and with each other prove a greater obstacle than an external foe. So again, the Eitz Chaim is saying something similar to Hirsch. There's an irony here. You're calling people who are ultimately wimps, you're calling them Anshe Milchama, either because they were of age, they could have fought, either because they shagged their destiny of fighting, but there is no question that there is a very, very strong irony here. What I will say in my defense is that if you read it in context and you read the long narrative that talks about pacifying all of the neighbors as you go in to be Yoresh, to inherit the land, putting that into context of Anshe Milchama is like saying, and you wouldn't do that. You would go to the top of the hill and you would have attacked.
Right. I mean, clearly Moses is distinguishing between the two generations, isn't he? I mean, but the question is, what's the ultimate point? What is Moses trying to say, and why is this the lead story in the book of Devarim? Isn't that the question?
So I started by saying that everything about Devarim is about entering the land. And so you could clearly make the case that entering the land, you want to know whether it's a Yerusha, otherwise known as an entitlement, or is it something that you have to fight for? And so it's not surprising that these are the issues that Moses is grappling with. And in a sense, getting back to what you were saying, you know, this is from Moses' perspective, and we are watching Moses deal with these issues. We're watching him repaint and recast the prior generation, and we're watching him give advice to the current generation. And you have to say, as you read it, you got to question, where is Moses on all this? Does he...
Right, well, that's what I want to know. That's my question. Where is Moses on all this?
You know, and I think I did this in another episode. The Chalutzim, the early Zionists, they took a song, they celebrated those people who went to the top of the hill, those people who, the Anshe Milchama, they clearly interpreted this story from Devarim as saying, yes, they were Anshe Milchama, they were fighters, and that's a good thing. It's clear that when Moses is referring to them, either, as you say, he's simply characterizing them, but I find that hard to believe. I think that in the context, he is saying it in a derogatory fashion, and you get an insight.
Has to be, right? I agree with you, by the way. I mean, you told me to play devil's advocate, so I was playing devil's advocate. But there's no question he's being critical. He's being derogatory.
So we don't have a lot of time left. I think as the clouds of war are above us. And all of us are saying we've been in a war for 9 months. Now we went ahead and we assassinated someone from Hamas in Iran, and we all felt good about that because, number one, it shows how powerful Israel is, how it still has...
We still have it, right?
We still have our mojo. It puts Iran on notice that we can do as we will in Iran. But as the dust settles, now we wonder, so how does that affect the negotiations that we took out this person? And how does that affect what's going to happen in terms of opening up another front? And so I think this way that Moses is dealing with milchama, the way that the other interpreters are dealing with it, the way that the chalutzim deal with it, make us think about war. And it's not just black and white. And these are questions of leadership. And maybe that's why Moses was so intent on making sure that we have a way of appointing leaders and sub-leaders. There are questions in the text about milchemet mitzvah and a milchemet reshut, an obligatory war and a war that is not necessary. For a people that was without a country for 2,000 years, we have a very rich tradition that starts, I would argue, from the discussion that we're having right now about thinking very carefully, not necessarily that war is bad or that peace is good or that we can always rely on God or that we always have to say kochem v'yotzem yodai, but that it is my hand that has wrung me this victory. But these are issues, especially during the 3 weeks, that we are invited to be part of this conversation. And I just found the richness of the way that the story has been retold and the way it makes us confront the questions that we are facing today of when to make war and when to trigger a response and when to rattle one's saber. Unfortunately, all of this is much too close to heart. But here we are.
Great read. I play a little devil's advocate, but I end by saying great read. Shabbat shalom, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have an easy fast, a meaningful Tisha B'Av, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Be well, everybody.
Shabbat shalom, everyone, and let us pray that the only milchama that we will be discussing today and this week are the Anshe Milchama in Dvarim, and that God will watch over us and our leaders will show wisdom, and that we will be protected and that there will be, in the near future, peace in our land. Shabbat Shalom. See you all
Amen.
next week.
Shabbat.